welcome in. This is the Route Consultant Weekly Webinar. For those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Josh Gregory. I am one of the directors here at Route Consultant on the consulting team. For all of our regular attendees, welcome back. And just for everyone who's new here, who's kind of jumping into this for the first time, we do try to have a lot of fun on this. It's not trying to be a super dry webinar. So I'll talk through some content at the beginning, and then we will have a fully open Q&A to try to answer any questions you guys can think of about this space, to try to make you feel as comfortable as possible, or answer anything that's lingering for you. I will be co-hosting later today with Bridget, who is one of the consultants on our team here. So she helps guide buyers through first acquisitions if you do decide to come onto that program. So like I said, I'll bring her on a little bit later to join in the Q&A. Before I get started, though, I do have to read a quick disclaimer for you, as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by, is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation and FedEx Ground. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation or FedEx Ground. All that to say, it's just, you're not going to hear any super secret information here that you can use, or any materially non-public information, but we do help you hear some helpful information nonetheless. Before I get into the content, there's a couple of events that I just wanted to highlight, and I'll remind you at the end too, but we do have an event coming up May 6th that is an Amazon and FedEx happy hour in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We also have one coming up May 20th in Raleigh, North Carolina. And that is a roadshow that if you attend as a contractor, we will also have a tour of the Morgan Olson plant in Virginia, and we'll have transportation arranged to get you there as well. The last event coming up in the near future is we are doing a happy hour in New York City on June 2nd. So if any of those are ones you have questions on or want to attend, just reach out to the team and we'll give you some more information. Now, one of the most important things here, when we get to the Q&A section, is that here at Route Consultant, for us to answer your question, you must first answer our question. So the question of the day this week is, what was your favorite childhood toy? So Bridget and I will answer that later. And for all of you, when you are asking your question in the Q&A box at the end, make sure you are first answering that question, which again is, what was your favorite childhood toy? And just again, as a reminder, don't put those questions in the chat or we'll miss them. So make sure you click on the little Q&A box at the bottom and use that to type in your question. So before we get to the Q&A, some quick content that I wanted to go over for you guys this week. So today I wanted to help address and answer a question that I get just about every day. And that is, do I have to buy these routes with cash or can I finance them? I'm not going to build any heightened suspense here or bury the lead. So to address that first, yes, you can finance these routes. But what I want to talk through today are basically the three things that you'll need to successfully finance a deal, which are the application and information provided by the buyer, the information provided by the seller, and then the process of selecting the right lender and how to go about that. So just to start with the buyer side of things, these are just a couple of the standard things that I want you to start to piece together for yourself if you are a buyer. And if you're considering getting into the space for the first time, this is one of those things that you can start to get ahead of and do before you've ever identified a deal. So the things that you'll want to start to gather and basically have on hand in a packet if you can, are pretty standard things like personal tax returns from the last 3 years, if you have them, 2 months of bank statements, a resume, and then a business plan or RFI. And there's a difference there. Resume is probably what you're traditionally thinking of when you're talking about kind of your work history and things you've done there. The RFI, or the request for vendor information, is something you'll do as part of the FedEx application. And for a lot of lenders, that is sufficient. Some will have a separate type of business plan they want you to fill out, though, as part of it. Another thing you'll need is a 3-year projection on the deal you're considering. If it's a deal through us, we can help you build that. If not, that might be something that either the bank has or that the broker you're working with can help you fill that out. You'll also need a personal financial statement for any owner in your corporation that's going to have a 20% or higher stake in the company. And then as the last thing, if you have any business that you are a greater than 20% owner in, you will also need business tax returns from the last 3 years if you have them. and then the interim financials for the business for the year that are no later than 60 days. So, if you're trying to have them for this year, they need to be more recent than 60 days out. Now, the goal with all of that is to start to consolidate everything and kind of make it shopping for a lender easier, because you've already built the packet. So once you've identified a lender, you've already kind of put everything together that they'll need and start to send that out. And like I said, you can do this as early in the process as you want, because this is something that's not dependent on how far you've gotten a deal or anything like that. This is purely going to be dependent on you and your information as a buyer. Now, on the flip side of things, there are some things that the seller needs to put together, certain documents that the bank will ask for. And what I'll say to any contractor who's, even if you're not thinking about selling or planning on selling anytime in the near future, it can be really helpful to keep in mind what these documents and requirements are for when the time comes that you do decide to sell. It's handy to have them ready. And some of these things might take a little bit of time in your own business to start to put together and make part of your ongoing business practices to keep up with these. So it can be a good practice to keep a list of this and those financial documents that you'll need, and start to make sure you have those and keep them as clean as you can if you do intend to sell in the future. So from the seller end, the main things we see banks ask for are 3 years of tax returns if possible. Obviously, some people won't have owned the business for 3 years, so as much as you can if it's less than 3 years. A P&L and a balance sheet from the most recent year of operation, so 2021 now. Though most banks are also going to ask for an interim P&L for 2022 that's no older than 60 days. There is a truck list that you'll want to provide, settlement statements for the bank, your contract, titles if you have them. Later down the line, if you don't have titles because they're financed, you'll need payoff letters. A purchase agreement is going to be a critical part of this. And then another one that you may not have experienced before is a COVID impact letter, where basically there are a couple of questions banks will ask just to kind of get a sense for how COVID impacted your business. And they're relatively simple questions to answer. So ideally, as a current contractor or potential seller, you can start compiling those in advance to make sure that you're ready when the time comes. Now, the last and probably the most important step for figuring out a financing path for this space is selecting the lender. The first thing that you'll want to look at is the type of lender you want to use. So that can be either conventional or SBA is kind of the main two categories we see people use. And at a general level, just not going into specifics per lender or for your specific circumstances, the SBA is typically going to be a 10-year loan with a higher interest rate, and it can have as low as a 10% requirement for the down payment. Conventional loans are typically going to be either a 5 or 7 year term with a lower rate that'll usually require a little bit of a higher down payment, usually 20 or 25%. Now, if anyone was following the news today, you probably saw that interest rates are increasing right now, like literally right now, as recently as an hour ago. So that is also a current factor when you're thinking about financing. I would not be surprised if that trend continues as the Fed tries to control inflation in the near future. So we may see some interest rates continue to rise, and that needs to be something you're factoring and thinking about if you're thinking about financing a business. Now, once you have narrowed it down to conventional versus this SBA, which one you're going to go with, it is at that point the time to choose which particular lender you're going to use. And the number one question I will tell you to ask lenders, and it's really the most important criteria, is have you done a FedEx deal before? You will run into plenty of lenders who have never done one, but will look at the financials and say, hey, yep, everything looks great. You can keep going. You can buy the business. I don't know much about FedEx, but these financials make sense to me. And then those deals will often blow up at the finish line if banks are not properly educated from the beginning on really what the FedEx contract looks like. There are certain things that I have seen in terms of one of the main things is around the FedEx contract not being able to be transferred to the bank in the event of default. I often see banks run into that question. So I've had it far too many times where deals blow up at the finish line because the bank is not aware of the FedEx space. So I do think that should be one of your most important criteria in selecting a lender. And ideally, they've done more than one deal. Every deal in this space is a little bit different, as I'm sure some of you have experienced. So the more experience the bank has, the better. I do want to clarify, though, that when you're thinking about choosing a lender, most lenders will not proceed very far with the discussions until you have identified a particular deal that you want to pursue. So if you are still in the pre-deal stage as a buyer, your main goal should be to choose kind of a lending structure that you want to pursue. Maybe think about general length of a term or interest rates that would make certain price ranges work for you. You won't be able to control that necessarily, but it will limit or put a box around what options work for you. And then kind of choose conventional or SBA, and then potentially look at creating a short list of lenders you want to talk to and speak with once you have identified a deal. It won't hurt to reach out and try to at least introduce yourself. Some of them will let you kind of like a pre-approval type process. So it's not going to hurt to do some of those if they will be open to it. I just want to make sure that you know that a lot of banks will push back on proceeding very far until you've identified a deal. So really what you're trying to do is be as prepared as you possibly can. Now, the last thing here is, in particular, if you're intending to target the SBA, you really need to look for deals that are SBA eligible. So what does that mean? So it can depend on a few factors. Typically, one of the first is that we usually need to see at least a year of ownership before a bank will finance it. And that this one in particular also typically applies to conventional. A bank or a business that has been owned for less than a year is really hard for a bank to finance and to feel comfortable about financing. Sometimes it'll work if you have the previous seller's financials, but it's not a guarantee. The other criteria, if it has been for over a year, is that ideally you're also going to need clean financials. If you were on the webinar last week, you've probably heard us talk about tax returns and how they aren't always the most important thing for actually getting a valuation and really understanding what a business is like and what it's worth, because they represent a business from a year ago, not the business today. But that being said, banks will still need them and ask for them, and especially the SBA. Sometimes conventionals will be more flexible around that, but the SBA is not. The other complexity comes in if you're buying a carve out, which is a piece of a larger business. So there are some lenders that we work with that will outright say no to carves from the SBA standpoint. And there are some that we work with that will be flexible around SBA carves. Typically, there will be a higher level of documentation needed, and that can sometimes be difficult to provide from a seller standpoint. I often see lenders on carve-outs asking for P&Ls and financials that correspond directly to the particular piece of the business you're buying, and that can be really difficult for a seller and the seller's accountant to carve out those financials. So just know that if you do intend to use the SBA on a carve-out, there are some kind of higher documentation hurdles to clear. And it's really helpful to talk to your lender in the process and make sure you're getting up-to-date information on what they need to continue to process that loan. So those are the things that you just need to keep in mind. If you do decide that SBA is going to be the focus, what you're going to use, there's just different criteria that you have to keep in mind. One other thing I want to mention, just as we're talking about financing, there are other options around what we call creative financing. And so that means options that are not cash or conventional or SBA financing. And one of the main ones we see is seller financing. And that's basically where the seller holds a note and essentially acts as the lender with an interest rate and payment terms that are defined by a contract. And so what I want you to hear, if you're a contractor looking to sell, seller financing is not a handshake deal. So if you've been burned in the past by just doing a handshake deal, that's not what we're talking about here. There will be legal language, oftentimes collateral backing the seller financing. So there is security, but it is basically the seller acting as the lender instead of the bank. And seller financing can be a way to really close a gap between a certain cash amount a buyer has and then the purchase price, especially if it's a deal that's been owned for less than a year or something where the bank is hesitant to finance it. If you can kind of close the gap between a certain down payment amount with seller financing, that can be a really attractive way to get a deal to proceed and not have to count on a bank to actually fund the deal. Another option we see often is the assumption of truck debt as an additional way to finance. And this can be just a much easier way to finance the deal than doing a full bank lending option. So essentially, if there is a certain amount of truck debt on the business, if the buyer will assume that, reduce the price accordingly. So let's say that it is a $500,000 business with $250,000 of truck debt, then the buyer can assume the debt and only need to bring that other half, that $250,000 on their own to the table to fund the full deal. And this can be a way I often see the transfer of this debt be much easier than the full financing of a full business. So keep truck debt, keep seller financing as different tools in your pocket if you're trying to figure out a different way to finance these deals. And for buyers, those are tools to use. For sellers, those can be tools as well, because at the end of the day, if you're trying to sell your business, you're trying to find a way to get the money together where they can actually buy it. And if a bank's not the option, then you've got to kind of think about some other creative ways. Again, the main first answer today is yes, you can finance a FedEx business, but it's just, I wanted to take the time because it's really important to know the documentation requirements for both the buyer and the seller. And then just as a buyer, do your proper due diligence on selecting the right lender. One of the things I often say too is the best way to get the best rate from a bank is to have multiple banks. So I said, create that short list, and you probably want to work with a few different banks and see which one gives you the most attractive rate, the one that you want to work with. And then from there, just work on getting a successful deal and being really successful financing one of these businesses. So that's the main thing I wanted to cover on financing today. So I will now bring Bridget on to talk through the new inventory for the week before we get to the Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. All right, we had 13 new listings on our public site this week. So we'll get started with one out of North Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This one's really big. This was a 31 P&D route operation listed right under 3 million, 2.999, putting it right at 86% of revenue. Currently operating around a 17% EBITDA margin. This comes with 3 managers and 16 spare vehicles. This has strong and consistent margins and growth, a strong, reliable team of managers who are highly experienced and loyal, and has a really high fleet value that's included in that purchase price. This one in North Pittsburgh is also SBA eligible. The next one is out of East Chattanooga, Tennessee. Right here in Tennessee. This is a 8 P&D route operation. This is currently listed at $525,000, right at about 55% of revenue. This one is currently operating around a 10 to 11% EBITDA margin. This one comes with 1 driving manager and 2 spare drivers available for growth and contingency. And these drivers are all very efficient and reliable. They've had a great run with this current contractor. So that's always a really good plus when you're looking at these businesses. And this business specifically comes from a contractor who's been in the business for over 6 years and has owned this specific one for 6 years too. The next one is out of West Virginia. This is a 10 P&D route operation, currently listed at $695,000. This is right around 57 to 58% of revenue. This is currently operating around a 13% EBITDA margin. This one does come with 1 manager and 1 spare truck. All the scanners are included in this sale. The fleet is comprised of newer model vehicles, so this is going to help with cost of repair and maintenance. And there is some seller financing available here in West Virginia. The next one is out of Ashland, Virginia. And this is a 6 P&D route operation, currently listed at $625,000. This puts it right around 93% of revenue. This one in Virginia is currently operating around a 21% EBITDA margin. It does come with 1 manager and 1 spare truck. It's comprised of very dense routes. It has a healthy mix of residential and business routes. And the volume here is expected to just increase. So already at a 21% EBITDA margin, looking pretty good and expected to keep going up there. The next one we have is out of Albany, Georgia. This is a 4 P&D route operation, currently listed at $525,000, putting it right about 85% of revenue. This is currently operating around a 17% EBITDA margin. This one has 1 manager and 2 spare trucks. This could be a remote ownership opportunity if you're looking for that. And there is assumable truck debt available if you're trying to get some creative financing there in Georgia. Next one is out of Quincy, Massachusetts. This is a 6 P&D route operation, currently listed at $794,000. That's right around 89% of revenue. This one in Quincy is operating around a 18 to 18.5% EBITDA margin. It does come with 1 manager and 3 spare trucks. This is another dense, low mileage operation that's going to provide relief from capital expenditures. This has strong and consistent margins and growth in Quincy, Massachusetts. Moving on, back to North Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we have another big one. This is a 21 P&D route operation. This is currently listed at $1.95 million, right around 88% of revenue. This is currently operating around an 17 to 18% EBITDA margin. It does come with 1 manager and 12 spare trucks. This has strong and consistent margins and growth as well. And this one should also be SBA eligible. The next one we have is out of Hurricane, Utah. This is an 11 P&D route operation listed at $990,000. That is right around 88% of revenue. This one is currently operating around a 14 to 15% EBITDA margin. It does come with 1 manager, is in a high development and growth potential in an extremely safe service area. And this one in Utah also has spare drivers available for growth and contingency. The next 3 are all out of, next 4 are all out of Texas. So if you've been waiting for Texas, listen up. We have 3 carve-outs out of San Antonio. So the first one is a 12 P&D route operation. This one is listed at $549,000, only at 48% of revenue. This one is currently operating around an 11% EBITDA margin. It does come with 1 manager, has a great roster of efficient drivers, and has 15 scanners included in that sale. The next one out of San Antonio is an 11 P&D route operation. This one's currently listed at $616,000, putting it right at around 50% of revenue. This one is currently operating around an 11.5% EBITDA margin. It comes with 1 manager that's been employed with this business for over 7 years. This also has a great roster of other efficient drivers, and this also includes 15 scanners in the sale. That third carve out of San Antonio is 6 line haul runs. This is currently listed at $1.43 million. That's right at 73% of revenue. This one's currently operating around a 16.5% EBITDA margin. It does come with 1 manager and 3 spare trucks. And it's comprised of 1 dedicated team run and then 3 unassigned team runs and 2 wild solo runs. All right. Okay, this is the another Amarillo, Texas. Okay, maybe we do have more Texas than I thought. Amarillo, Texas, we have another 6 line haul run operation. This one is $1,040,000, right at 58% of revenue, currently operating around a 12% EBITDA margin. This is comprised of 2 dedicated solo runs and 4 wild solo runs. This does come with 1 driving manager and 2 spare trucks. And then the last one is out of Houston, Texas. This is 40 DSP routes. This one is currently listed at $2.875 million. That's right at 69% of revenue, currently operating around a 23% EBITDA margin. Does have one manager, has a history of profitable margins with a positive revenue trend. It has a multi-tiered management structure already in place to run the daily operations. And this current entity has successfully met Fantastic Plus bonuses for 41 of the past 45 weeks. So if you know anything about the Amazon space, that Fantastic Plus is a very impressive rating. So that wraps up our inventory for this week. Josh, I'm going to take a sip of water and catch my breath. But you got to tell us what your favorite childhood toy is.
Will do that. And yeah, for anybody who didn't hear at the beginning, question of the day is, what was your favorite childhood toy? So if we're talking the one I played the most, it's probably like a Game Boy, but I feel it doesn't feel like a toy to me. So my other option is Legos, and I did lots of those, and I still have Legos even in my office today. So it's a toy that never faded.
All right, very good. I guess mine, there are so many options I could go with. I grew up with like lots of baby dolls and like Polly Pockets and all of that, but I will never forget how excited I was when I got my first Easy Bake Oven for Christmas. And I have to say, I don't think my baking has really improved much from then. I'll blame that on my mom, I guess. But no, my cooking is a little bit better, but my baking probably is still at that Easy Bake level. Nothing too complicated for me.
I don't even think I can do Easy Bake level of baking. So that would be
All right. Well, let's jump into the Q&A.
Okay.
First one we have is from Ferris. Ferris says, oh gosh, how do I pronounce this? Meccano, is that how it is? Meccano was my favorite toy, and still. And I did look this up because I had to know what this was. Obviously, I mean, I don't even know how to pronounce it, right? But this is kind of like Legos. It's like the more complicated version of Legos. So like really impressive. I've seen it before, but very like engineer mind type of toy. Okay, so Ferris wants to know, does the age of a FedEx contract affect the route price? And if the routes, I guess, if the contract is about to expire during the purchasing time, is it guaranteed that the contract will be renewed with the new owner?
Yeah, so a couple of things here. First, the age of the contract does not affect the purchase price. That's not something we take into account. But the contract renewal timeline will affect the purchase timeline. What could happen is, first off, let's say there is a renewal while you're in the middle of the purchasing. Oftentimes, FedEx will wait for that new contract to start until the new buyer is allowed to start. So let's say, you're in the purchase process right now and the new contract starts May 25th. Even if you're ready to go, they'll probably wait for stand up to happen until after May 25th for the new buyer. In terms of if the seller could lose the contract, so a couple of things. If that contract is in jeopardy and you are worried about the seller losing it, FedEx will not transfer it to you unless you are going to get a clean slate, essentially. So if like the contract is about to be lost, they wouldn't transfer it to you and then take it from you a week later. Especially like that's if you're doing an asset purchase agreement. If you do a stock sale, you could run into that issue if for some reason you're not putting a new authorized officer in place. So if all you did was buy the equity of a business and didn't change any of the employees, so it didn't change from the FedEx perspective, you could do that to speed up the deal, but you don't have any security around how that transfer process will work if there is something like that in place. So short answer, you're basically protected. You're not going to lose the contract. You won't, if you take the contract over, it's your contract and you'll get essentially a clean slate.
All right. Next one is from Sub Nash. He said his favorite toy was a magnet runner.
I think that was that the little wheel that was on the silver rail that like, it's like,
Oh yes, that was really cool.
yeah.
The only thing I could think of were those like little magnadoodles.
I don't think it's that.
No, okay. Yeah, that toy is much cooler. All right, so he wants to know, do I need to put personal assets up as collateral after a 20 to 25% down, or will it be based on the previous year's NOI?
There's typically some type of collateral required of you. With the SBA, you're often having to use your house as collateral. I would say it's going to be a real rarity if there's not any personal assets required. Sometimes the trucks can be enough collateral for the bank, but it's not always a guarantee. So there will often be some kind of either guarantee or collateral that you'll have to put up in a financing situation.
Gotcha. All right. I'll go easy today, honestly, just because I can't call this person out, but we have an anonymous question here who forgot to upload their answer for the daily question. So I will forgive you this time, but they want to know, how can we sell a large P&D route operation like the one in Pittsburgh that I mentioned as a whole? Is there any way around the FedEx limitation on scale?
So there's no way around it. You can't bypass scale. There are types of sales you can do that take scale into account and still kind of answer the risk questions FedEx have. So scale is a risk analysis from the FedEx perspective, where they are saying that they do not want any one contractor in a terminal to be too large as a percentage of the terminal, where if that one contractor was to fail, it would tank the whole terminal. So it's a risk analysis that makes sense. So if you have a business that has grown to overscale, and FedEx was a little more lax on scale limits in the past than they have been recently. So it could be that there are businesses that are overscale and you're trying to sell a piece to get under it, or even sell the whole operation. So the way you would sell the whole operation is if you found essentially a set of partners who have independent resources, could interview separately, because from FedEx's perspective, they'll need to split it into multiple entities with multiple owners. And each of those individual owners will need to get approved by FedEx, because what FedEx needs to see is that each of those owners are someone that they will approve and they will feel comfortable with running their piece of the business. Now, if it's a set of partners, they could finance the deal as one business and do it that way. But just from a FedEx perspective, you do have to have multiple entities and multiple authorized owners to make that work. So if you're trying to sell the entire business all at once, you're looking for a set of buyers who all independently have their own resources, can pass an interview, and can have separate entities set up. So it's not easy. Sometimes that's why a lot of times you'll see people sell it one piece at a time, but it is possible. And there are buyers and sets of buyers like that. And if you're willing to, if the main goal is to try to get out all at once, then sometimes it can be worth it to look for those types of buyers.
Awesome. All right, next one is from Diana. Diana said Jax was her favorite toy growing up. I haven't heard that one yet, so that one's a good.
I feel like I never played Jax right. I just like basketball, and I don't know if I ever really learned the rules of Jax. It's one of those games that everyone has, and I feel like a lot of people don't actually know how to play it.
I grew up with 5 brothers, and I feel like it always got pretty violent. We're very competitive. All right, Diana wants to know, is it realistic to purchase my first routes out of state? How would an absentee owner work? How often would I have to travel to where it's located?
Yeah, so it is possible. The biggest question there is, how far is out of state? We have a general recommendation that your first purchase should be within 5 hours of where you live, and ideally closer than that. You want to be able to get to the terminal if you're needed. And for a lot of businesses, depending on the management structure, you may need to be more involved than once a quarter, especially at the beginning. I would strongly advise, if you can, to spend at least a few weeks, if not a couple of months, if you can, in the business, and more invested from a time perspective at the beginning of your acquisition. But the main thing is that if you have the right managers in place, or if the business you're buying has the right managers in place, it is possible to run remotely. And I would say it's better to say you can have remote ownership. Absentee ownership is not something you should really shoot for or expect. And what I mean there is, even if you are not physically present, you need to be involved and be able to answer questions and address anything FedEx has, or make sure you have somebody on your team who can in real time, so that as the authorized owner, FedEx will expect you to have knowledge of your business. So if you live 5 hours away, but anytime FedEx calls, you have the answer, you can immediately talk to your team and get an answer, and can visit, semi-regularly, it can work. But if you live remotely, FedEx never sees you, and anytime they call you, you don't have the answer, or you are continually having some kind of service or safety issue, then remote doesn't work as well. So it's more about, do you have the right team in place, and can you still manage the business without physically being there, so that FedEx doesn't worry about it. And then as a last thing, I'll just say, terminal managers all vary. There are some terminal managers that are completely fine with remote owners, and there are some that will never approve a remote owner. So it can be helpful to ask a seller, if you're buying, kind of if there are any remote owners in the business, right, in the terminal right now, or if they know at all the terminal manager's preference on it, and that can dictate some of how you might have to operate to be successful.
All right. Next one is from Jonathan. Jonathan says, my favorite toy growing up was my GameCube. Another gamer. He wants to know, does Route Consultant provide any buyers broker services? I understand there's a consulting package and brokerage services for the seller, but have not seen anything for the buyer. Just curious.
Yeah, so we do have basically an acquisition support service for buyers, where there's a lot of training we have to walk you through the process, get you qualified, things like helping you on the APA, helping you on financing, helping you with the RFI, getting you prepared for a deal, and then walking you through all the way through a deal. So there are true buyer support consulting services we have. If you want more details on that, just reach out to the team and we can connect you with somebody and talk you through it.
Absolutely. All right, next one is from Craig. Craig said his favorite childhood toy, he had two, Lincoln Logs and Nintendo.
That works.
Love both of those classics.
I also loved both, yeah.
Okay, he wants to know, what does scaling your FedEx business look like after you purchase your first set of routes? Josh, we all want to know.
Yeah, so it can look a lot of different ways. So there are many terminals and territories where your growth may just be keeping up with the organic growth that happens in your territory. So that's almost always something that you'll see that'll factor, that year over year, you'll see growth in your territory that just comes from either more packages being ordered or more houses being built in your area, because you own a set of zip codes. So any additional volume that goes to the zip codes is yours. So there's that organic volume. And sometimes that's all you're doing on a growth perspective, is just keeping up with that. If you are at scale already in your terminal, then you probably won't be able to purchase any additional at the terminal, because that would most likely move your scale percentage up above the limit. So that's probably not an option at the terminal you're at, unless you are really far below the scale limit. What I would say in general, though, is you can be at scale in every terminal in the country. So a lot of times what scale and scaling up can look like is looking for nearby terminals that'll be your next target, either for an acquisition or contingency is another option. So contingency is when you are helping out struggling contractors, sending a team out to another territory or another terminal. And sometimes that can even lead to acquiring full territories, essentially for free, as long as you can continue to service it with resources. And so a lot of ways that I see people grow is through contingency at a terminal and then ending up there as a permanent contractor. So whether it's through purchasing or contingency, there are definitely ways to grow beyond just the organic side of things. And then line haul is a completely different story. Line haul, there are a whole different set of ways to grow. But what I would say in line haul is, if you can secure trucks and drivers, you will be able to find additional volume. It is not easy to secure trucks and drivers, but right now, if you can find those and find those resources, there is volume in the network for you to continue to grow.
All right. Next one is from Felicia. Felicia says, Atari was a popular game in my family and with my friends when growing up. And I did have to just look this one up as well. I know, I know, it's awful.
I played a lot of Atari, Pitfall. I spent a lot of time not surviving very long in Pitfall. I distinctly remember playing that for a significant number of hours.
Google says it was a 1972 created video game that became a pioneer in arcade games. So like one of the first home console systems. I don't know, Josh. Okay. We were too busy fighting over jacks. Okay. And burning things in my Easy Bake oven. All right. So Felicia's question, she just wants you to expound on things that impact the interest rates on financing these FedEx deals. You mentioned interest rates changing a little bit. So if you can give us any more details there, that would be great.
Yeah. So the interest rates I was talking about that adjusted recently was just the federal government adjusted interest rates today. So banks will react to that as well. And that's kind of the main thing that sets interest rates. You may be able to secure lower interest rates from certain banks depending on your history, and the amount of down payment you put down will sometimes help you secure a lower interest rate. The main reason conventional lending is often lower interest rates is because the term of the loan is shorter than 10 years. Typically, the longer the length of the loan, the higher the interest rate will be, because for them to take a higher risk on you from paying it off for a longer amount of time, they basically need a higher payment from you, which comes from that interest rate.
Yeah. All right. Next one is from Cornelius. Cornelius says that Legos were his favorite toy. Another Lego fanatic. And Josh, I don't know if you admitted today that you still are a big fan of Legos.
Yeah, I got them. I've got my my Lego bonsai tree right here.
It is the coolest thing. I love that. It's a great part of your life.
A lot easier to maintain than a real bonsai tree, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Maybe it's something I could keep alive. All right. So Cornelius wants to know, how many runs do new line haul contractors have to have to enter the FedEx space? Is there a minimum or a maximum?
Yeah, so for line haul, the minimum is 2. You have to have at least 2 runs, and really they're just trying to avoid the old model of basically being an owner operator and just having 1 truck. So the minimum is 2.
All right, awesome. Next one is from Chris. Chris says Nintendo was my favorite toy as a kid.
Did you look that one up, Bridget?
Okay, you know what? No, I want to know what Chris's favorite Nintendo game was. Was Chris a Mario guy? Was he a Madden guy? Maybe a GoldenEye? I don't know. Those are the kind of things that I need to know.
Okay.
All right, so Chris has a few questions. Some are specific to line haul, so we'll go through each of these piece by piece, but the first one's pretty simple. What is a wild run? Always feel really silly saying those because
so they're called different things, but a wild run is essentially a run that is not on the contract. It will not be listed as either an unassigned or an assigned position on the contract. It's essentially an extra tractor that you have that may run regularly, it may not, but there's no contractual guarantee at all. It's basically something that FedEx is aware of. It's a resource FedEx is aware of and will sometimes lean on and call if they need additional resources. There are some terminals that for whatever reason, you don't have an official unassigned position, but you do run that wild run fairly regularly. It's just not going to be on your contract or officially guaranteed.
Gotcha. All right, follow-up line haul question from Chris. He wants to know, when looking at unassigned line haul run businesses, is there an actual contractual agreement in place with FedEx for these runs? Or are these types of runs simply provided to the contractor because other contractors aren't able to complete the runs?
Yes, so unassigned are contractually, they are on the contract. So you will have an unassigned position. So it's not a guarantee of a certain destination. It's basically a guarantee on a board. At larger terminals, there may be a solo unassigned board and a team unassigned board, or an AM or PM different board. But essentially, it's just a rotation where different unassigned contractors, they go through the list and assign runs for each day to each person on the list, and it just rotates through. So you may not go to the same place every day, but you are guaranteed a position on that board. There may be days that you don't always dispatch, but if you don't dispatch one day, you'll be the top of the list for the next day. So there are guarantees in place. It's just there's not a guarantee on what that mileage is going to look like.
Gotcha. All right. Next one is from David. David said his favorite childhood toy was the Hot Wheels tracks. I knew we'd have some Hot Wheels fans in here. He wants to know a few questions, but we'll start with this one. What is your opinion on Schedule K, and if it's going to be improved this peak season?
Yeah, it was a little less rich this year than it has been in previous years. It's definitely true. So hopefully it'll be richer this year. There's a lot of things that have come into play this year around different economic impacts. Hopefully Schedule K can be a way to improve the profitability for us this year. There's no guarantees though. So we'll see what it looks like. I think we'd all be happier with a little bit richer Schedule K this year, but we'll kind of see how that plays out.
All right. Follow up from David. He says, looking at a split and trying to figure out the price of half of the business, is half of revenue, not including trucks, a good valuation? So when you look at the price of a business and the percentage of that fleet that's allocated to the price, like what's a good range? What are we looking at?
Yeah, so using broad ranges on a carve is tough. Half of that revenue, it really depends on if this half is similar in composition to the other half of the business. So, if half of the business that you're buying is a set of really dense routes and the other half is a bunch of rural routes, those two pieces separated can look really different from a revenue and valuation perspective. The other thing is if we just split it and split the revenue in half, 50%, and remove the fleet, it depends on how rich that fleet is. If it's a really bad fleet, then I don't know necessarily if that valuation is going to make sense. So let's say it's $1 million business in revenue, half of it's 500K. If it's an amazing fleet that comes with it and you remove, I don't know, I would just say that using revenue percentage as a price as a pure valuation standpoint for a carve in particular is really tough to do properly. Without being able to kind of really go into detail on the business, it's hard for me to say if half of revenue, not including trucks, is good. I would say in general, a lot of the times, if a business does not have the fleet, I would often price it below 50%. It just depends though on how many trucks you need. And more of that right now is because of the difficulty and the expensiveness of actually acquiring trucks right now. So that can have a bigger impact on the capital you'll need if it doesn't come with any trucks. So there's a bunch of different factors that go into it that without seeing the business, it's tough to just say, yeah, 50% of revenue, that'll work. There's no general recommendation I can make there for a carve like that.
All right. Another one from David. David wants to know when it comes to justifying hiring a full-time BC, where do you want your revenue to be?
It's generally more of a function in terms of the way we typically see it being necessary is when you get to about 8 to 10 routes is usually when you need to add a manager. So if it's an average business doing 100K in revenue per route, that could be like an 800 to $1 million business. But really, it's more about the size of the operation that we typically see justifying the need for a manager. When you're in those smaller businesses, it can justify a manager if you've got a really profitable business and you just kind of want to take management load off of yourself. But typically with the amount of responsibilities needed on smaller businesses, it makes more sense to be kind of an owner operator model at those smaller size businesses.
All right. Next one is from Jeffrey. I had to get this question in there because it's another Atari, and I will never forget what that game is now. Atari 2600. he wants to know, and you kind of touched on this earlier, but how hands-on does an owner need to be with FedEx and Amazon routes? Could these be or become more passive?
Yeah,
Is there a difference with the FedEx versus the Amazon?
yeah, I'd say in general, it's still going to be something where while you may not ever be like, you may be hands-on in the short term, there may be ways you can step back, but a lot of the ways, the ways you step back is either by putting the right human capital from a management perspective in place to handle responsibilities, or spend on certain vendors to take away those responsibilities you're owning as an owner. So for it to be truly passive, it usually takes a larger business where you can have enough layers to justify kind of replacing all of the things an owner does with either vendors or human capital. It's usually really difficult to do that at an average size business. There's just not the margins to support it. So I would not tell anyone to expect a truly passive income from this anytime, and unless you're getting to really massive size businesses. More of what I would say is being hands-on in the beginning is important. It can scale back. It's better to prepare as if you have to be more hands-on and then scale back once you understand the business and understand what's really needed of you. But like I said, one of the biggest things and biggest factors is really going to be, what does that particular terminal expect of you? Understanding those and making sure that you're able to meet those standards. And that'll come up in the interview as well, based on how you answer those questions. The terminal manager will know what your kind of availability is going to look like, and whether that fits their standards or not.
All right. Next one is from James. James said his favorite childhood toy was the Evel Knievel stunt cycle. That's a very good one. I hadn't thought of that in a very long time. He wants to know what the line haul, I guess, point systems on their trucks mean, and is there any implication once a line haul business is sold to a new contractor? Does something happen with those points?
Yeah, so the point system is essentially a FedEx system for you to bid on and improve your line haul runs. So with FedEx, on either a dedicated or unassigned route, you will generate 1 point per day that you are operating. So these point totals essentially accumulate over time. And when a new dedicated assigned run is posted at the terminal by FedEx, they allow everyone at that terminal to bid on the run. And so you will bid on a run with all of your points from one of your tractors. And if you win the bid, you will trade the run you bid with for the new run that was up for bid. So it does not this is not acquiring an additional route. This is essentially converting the run you bid with for the run you bid on. So you would only bid on something that's better than what you have, which could either be, maybe it's a run that's a destination you want to go to, or it has higher mileage, so it's more revenue, or maybe it's a team and you've got a solo, or vice versa. So you would really only bid on something that's better. Now, when you are selling your business, point totals will transfer on the runs to the new buyer. So that's one of the advantages of buying line haul instead of starting fresh, is you do get to inherit those point totals, which are essentially years, months, years of time that you are inheriting as a currency that you are able to use to improve the business once you take over.
Awesome. Next one is from Kara. Kara said her favorite game was Mancala.
Yep.
I had a sister who was a big Mancala fan. We would always lose the little marbles, though. Never keep up with them all. We'd end up using like jelly beans or raisins or something. Yeah. Okay, she wants to know, can I sell a truck to Hello Truck Lease program that we have, and then lease it back? It's clever. I've never heard of that, but
I don't think I've had that question before. I wouldn't think you can, but at the same time, I'll jot it down. I'll go ask our team and get back to you on it. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Next one is from Tina. Tina, we share this in common. She is an easy bake oven girl. She wants to know, they were recently awarded a business that they bid on. Are there any limitations on when you can sell those routes? Great question.
No. Yeah,
And
so yeah, you can start the process, you can sell the routes, just know that obviously there's a different, it's going to be difficult to finance something that you've only owned for that short of a period of time. So the selling process will be something where you're most likely looking for either cash or combination of cash, seller financing, maybe some kind of truck debt, but a bank's, it's going to be difficult to get through a bank if you were just awarded it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, guys, time is winding down. I know we have a couple questions left. We probably won't be able to answer everything today, but we're going to try to finish out with a few here before the end of the hour. So next one is from Diana. Diana says she also loves the Nintendo. And she has just a few questions here. She wants to know, where can I find the terms of the contract with FedEx, and are they all the same?
Yeah, so you can reach out to our team. The general ISP agreement is pretty constant, but then there are schedules at the back that have essentially similar language, but a lot of it's going to vary station to station, at least, or contract to contract, at least in terms of like the rates they are paid. And there's a couple of things that change. There are some things that are constant, but if you reach out to the team, we can probably give you an example of at least a generic contract that doesn't change much.
All right. She also wants to know, is there a specific company we would have to use to install safety measures, cameras, sensors, etc., or do I find someone to provide that service?
Yes. So every safety technology that FedEx requires, they're also going to have an approved vendor list on MyGroundBiz and show you kind of who you can use, have the contact information on who to reach out to. So yeah, I would highly recommend to at minimum check that. There's a couple of things where they say you can get there's a larger list or you can use anyone, but most things have a very tight confined list of approved vendors. So definitely check that before you just start installing things.
All right. Next one we'll get to is from Felicia. Felicia said she was also a big classic jump rope girl. And she wants to know, Josh, can you expound on Amazon warehouse scale requirements? Because these things, like the one I read today was 40 DSP routes. So that's crazy.
Yeah, so Amazon's really different in that respect. So it's not something where you would even necessarily run 40 routes a day. There's a lot of fluctuating volume, and you may even be in different areas some days of the week, or some weeks maybe in pretty different areas. You have a contract with FedEx, you kind of know general idea, or with Amazon, you kind of know general idea of it, but Amazon will kind of set that volume and the size that they need you to deliver. So it's basically as large as they let you get. It's not the same type of per terminal percentage as there is with FedEx.
Gotcha. All right. This will be our last question of the day. And this is coming from an anonymous attendee. So I'm guessing this is probably one of our ladies here. Her favorite doll or her favorite toy was Barbie dolls, a classic.
The biggest
I know. Sorry. So she wants to know, if there is a bad fleet, can you choose not to buy one or two of the really bad trucks, or can you negotiate the price?
Yeah, I'd say in most scenarios, that's an option where you can basically say, hey, there's a certain number of trucks I don't want, and the seller will typically be okay with that. And maybe there should be probably a price reduction there. I would encourage you to, in this used market, take a look at comparables and kind of decide if that is really the decision you want to make, just with how expensive the used market can be right now. It may be better, at least in the short term, to acquire those. But on the flip side, if you truly determine you don't want those trucks, it is a pretty good used market. So I'm sure the seller won't be too upset about being able to sell those.
All right. Well, that does it today. That brought us right at 4:30, Josh. So thank you for educating us and answering all of our questions. We appreciate your time here with us. And if I didn't get your questions answered today, please feel free to reach out to our team at Route Consultant, and we will try to get those answered for you offline.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming out. We'll see you next time.